First story. I currently, 40M, had my ex, 35F, completely destroy our relationship while I was working out of town for a few months. This happened a year ago, and wished I had these stories as a resource while going through it. I have just started to use Reddit and been reading the experiences of others here, and have decided to share my story in hopes it will maybe help others. That way some good may come from some of the worst times of my life. A little backstory for context for the story and insight to some of the decisions I made. When I turned 30, I left the major city in my province. It is like a state if you are an American, because buying just a simple house is over $1 million, and I don't make near enough to afford that. My goal was to move to somewhere more rural to buy a house, meet someone, get married and have a child or two. It was my only dream I had and believed I could attain it. I lived out in the bush on my stepdad's property in a run-down trailer I bought so I could save money for the first 3 years. I had my dog, but the loneliness of living in the middle of nowhere had got to me. By then I had saved a fair amount of money, so I decided to move into the town. It was nice, it cut my commute down by 40 minutes. I had started to make a few friends and no longer felt so isolated. It was through my friends I met my future ex. Let's call her Callie. She had a long-term boyfriend when we first met. Their relationship ended a couple of years after meeting her, and we started dating a few months after. We mostly had a great relationship for the next 4 years. The only thing was it was on again off again. She would dump me after I did anything really special for her for a week and beg me to take her back. It was like clockwork. I used to think it was because of her depression and that she didn't believe she deserved to be truly happy. Nowadays I actually think she might have been cheating the whole time and just felt guilty about it when I did nice stuff for her, but I will never know the truth. I don't care what the reality is anymore anyway. Time has a funny way of making stuff like that irrelevant. We did have one bigger break of about 5 months. When it happened, I took time off work to travel in my RV the whole time, from spring to summer. I really didn't like the town I lived in and decided to use that time to check out the rest of my Provence to figure out where I wanted to restart my life. She was basically the only reason I stayed for so long. I did have a decent job and family close by, but most people I met there were not good people. Lots of drug users, liars, and general scumbags. I had only a few real friends there. After I got back and had decided where I was going to move to, she had decided she wanted me back. She begged me to stay and be with her. She told me that she wanted to get serious. We started making real progress about getting married, having kids and looking at buying a house. Everything was coming up Millhouse and I couldn't be happier. So you can probably guess this is when my tale becomes interesting for you, and life got real bad for me. My career is seasonal. I work from spring to the end of fall and can go on unemployment insurance or find work. My dad had asked if I could help on his farm breeding horses that winter when I had still planned to leave my town. I had promised him that I would because it would give me a place to stay before people in my field of work would be looking for employees. This had been agreed upon before me and Callie had got back together. Now I have always been a man of my word. It's something I take great pride in. I have always hated liars. I don't mind a little embellishment to make a story more fun, or if two people's stories are different, as long as they both believe that was how the events happened. Everyone remembers things slightly off. She was upset that I had intended to keep my word to my dad, but I had every second weekend off. The town my dad is in was only a 2-hour drive. So I told her I would be back twice monthly for weekends and that it would only be for 4 months. For the first 2 months everything seemed fine. During this time I started to look at rings to pop the question and booked an expensive spa for 2 days in May to propose. There was only one weird thing that happened during the first 2 months. On one of my visits she confided in me that her brother's wife had cheated on him and that their newborn baby was most likely not his. I was shocked that she not only knew but didn't plan to tell him. She said she didn't want to tell him for fear of breaking up the family. I told her that he has the right to know, and that she was being a bad sister by knowing and not telling him. I also informed her, if he found out she knew and didn't say anything, that he would most likely kick her out of his life. She made me swear I wouldn't tell him. Even though I thought it was wrong, I did agree to not say anything. It did get me wondering how she could not only not tell him, but stay friends with someone that could do that to her brother. I think that's when I started to question her morals. The third month she asked that I didn't come out because she was sick. I told her I didn't care, I could still come out and take care of her. She convinced me that she didn't want me to come, so I just worked on the farm instead. I switched weekends so I could come out the next instead of in 2 weekends. The weekend she was sick, her phone was off the whole time, lasting into the week. She told me her phone went through the washing machine. She was actually on a bender, but I didn't learn that till later. So I head out the following weekend. As soon as I arrive, I start getting super sketchy vibes. I was already weirded out about the stuff with her brother and ghosting me for 4 days, as we texted multiple times a day normally. At first she acts great to me, cooks me steak, and we go out to the bush to have a fire in the snow. At the fire she really started drinking heavily. She then mentions a guy she had been hanging with, let's call him Brad. So alarm bells start going through my head. We go back to her house and she keeps drinking. I wanted to keep a clear head, so I only had 3 beers all evening. She put her phone down unlocked because of how drunk she was, and I took it to the bathroom with me to look up texts between them. I felt so guilty for doing it at first, but once I see the text between the two of them, the guilt is replaced with rage. I go to her room to confront her and she breaks down. First, how dare I go through her phone? This never would have happened if I would have broken my promise to my dad. Nothing really happened between them, blah, blah, blah. I was furious and drove off. She blows up my phone the whole time. I don't answer. 10 minutes after I left, her mother called me. She lives at her mom's house. I took the call and her mom said she is freaking out and has harmed herself. I decide to go back and she has a bandage wrapped around her arm. Her mom hid all the sharp objects she could find. She was having a full-on panic attack and begs me to not leave. I told her I would stay if she told me the truth. She admits to hooking up with him one time just that last weekend when she asked me not to come out. It kind of matches the messages and I believe her. I stay there till she falls asleep. Once she does, I send Brad a text saying that she has a boyfriend with some screenshots of our conversations me and her have had that week. I was about to drive back to the farm when the dude called her phone. I pick up the call and tell him I am her boyfriend. He asks if that was a joke and I assure him it is not. He said he didn't know and actually apologized. I tell him that I'm pissed, but if he didn't know, I couldn't blame him. I should have asked him more questions, but I was tired, not thinking straight, and just wanted to go back to the farm, even though it was 2 a.m. by this point. I get home and crash. Turned my ringer off because I know once she wakes up she will start calling like crazy. After getting the horses in for the night, I decided to look at my phone for the first time all day. Around 30 missed calls and a ton of texts. I decide I need another day before I talk to her. Now while the whole day all I can think about is that it was just one time. She seems to be genuinely remorseful about it, how I'm 39 and really want children before I get too old. I took a call from her the next day on Sunday in the morning. She is still wasted. She hadn't stopped drinking since I was there Friday. We talk and I tell her that I am really upset, but I'm willing to give us another chance. I still was in love with her and wanted to have kids, get married and buy a house with her. It was the dream I felt I worked so hard for. She was so happy I took her back and swore to me nothing like this would ever happen again. Basically I was a fool, lol. So I decided on my next set of days off to borrow my stepdad's summer home on the river so we can have the place to ourselves. I grab food that she loves so I can cook her dinner and try to make it very romantic. I want to rekindle my love with her, so I wanted to go all out on an amazing weekend. I pick her up and she is already a little drunk. I kind of wanted to hang sober, but I don't want to mess up with her, so don't say anything, thinking we can do a sober day when I take her out to go shopping and dinner the next day. When we get there she gets hammered. Callie had brought a big of bottle Fireball on top of a bunch of White Claws. I again didn't really drink that night. Once she was drunk and tired, I carried her to the bed. As Callie is in my arms, she looks up at me and says in slurred words, "I don't know why you even felt threatened by Joe." I ask, "What did you just say?" "I don't know why you even felt threatened by Brad," she replied. I put her to bed and my mind starts racing. Now her ex before me has a really close name to the one she said first, but I also know she has a friend named Joe. I only met a couple of times. They were not close or even hung out, but were more like acquaintances. I go in her purse to look at her phone again, but the battery is dead, and I can't find her charger. I have an iPhone, so I can't charge it up to look. I didn't sleep that well that night with everything going on in my head. I woke up at 6 a.m. to her being very loud on the phone. I went out to the living room, and she had drank all the booze left over from the night before. I ask her who she was on the phone with and she tells me an Uber to leave. I ask, why is she going to leave? Callie tells me she is upset that I tried to get into her phone. Guess I didn't put it back in her purse. Must have been out of sorts and forgot. I tell her I can drive her once I go to the washroom and get some clothes on. I go to do that, come out of the washroom to see Callie has already left. She was so drunk that she had left half her stuff behind. I decided to have breakfast before bringing her stuff to her house. After breakfast I packed her stuff into my SUV and noticed it had snowed that night. I could see her footprints out into the driveway. While dropping off her stuff I noticed there were no footprints leading to her house, so I tried calling Callie. No answer. I left her stuff in the snow and decided to drive by her brother's and sister's house to see if there were footprints going into any of their houses, but there were none. I sent her a nasty text about knowing she didn't go home, to go be with Brad or Joe or whoever and never call me again. It was a lot more profane than that, but that's the gist of it. Cleaned up the house my stepdad lent me and back off to the farm yet again. The next day she blows up my phone, and again I wait another day to talk to her. She tells me that she went home, but I know that can't be true from the snow, but she says I must have been mistaken. She apologizes for getting drunk and leavening and that she is going to stop drinking after her birthday in 2 weeks. She has rented a hotel in the town I'm in for her birthday and wants to spend it with me. I agree just because I have to know the truth and want to look at her phone to make sure I am not crazy. She had gaslit me to the point I was questioning what I saw with my own eyes. A couple of days later, I decided to send Joe a message on Facebook to see if he would give me the truth. I get a text from her telling me not to bug her friend and that she is embarrassed. I apologize and tell her I am excited about her birthday soon. The weekend of her birthday comes, so I go to meet her at the hotel. She brought her sister and other friend along. It actually is a really fun time. The girls did coke the first night into the second evening. I don't really like it, but I figured she can let loose, especially if she is going to stop drinking after her birthday. I also knew by Saturday night that they would all crash hard, so it would give me time to look at her phone so I could know the truth. As I mentioned, the weekend was really fun, so I felt bad about going into her phone yet again. I did it anyway and my whole world came crashing down. Now I figured that I would maybe see Brad or Joe texts and Facebook messages. Seemed like Brad was done, but Joe and her were totally hooking up. I also found out that she had slept with 3 other guys. I also saw she was using coke all the time now. She did it maybe 3 times a year when we dated, but now it was every weekend. It looked like she started using regularly right before I left for the farm. Joe helped get it for her too. Out of all the guys, he was the one she hung with the most. Turns out he was also a meth head who was trying to quit for her. She also went to his house the morning she left the other weekend to hook up and buy coke. I was floored. I just stared and took screenshots till the early morning. I decided I wasn't just going to dump her, but I wanted to ruin her life, not realizing she was already doing that all by herself. But hindsight is 2020. So I started coming up with a plan of what I was going to do. I woke up the next morning and acted like everything was fine and went back to the farm. I was still so upset and didn't want to harm myself or others, so had a family friend take my firearms for a while. I don't think I would have used them on myself or others, but I knew I wasn't thinking clearly and didn't want them in my house while I was like that. I didn't have to see her till I moved back because the next set I had off I had tickets for a concert in the city I used to live in. During that time all I thought about was how I was going to do something to ruin her life. I came up with some small things, but my main plan was to pretend like we were fine and ghost her when my contract was up with my boss next winter. I had promised him another year after Callie and I had gotten back together. Just typing it out makes me look back and cringe that I was so crazy. When I went to the city for the concert, I told my best friend, my brother, and a few others my plan. No one liked it and thought I should just go no contact, cut her straight out of my life. That probably was the smart thing to do, but emotion was clouding my judgment. Also, you all would get this story. They even informed me that because I would be lying to her, that I would be compromising my morals and turning into a worse person they didn't recognize. I either didn't see it that way or care. I have a hard time recalling what my brain was thinking during that time. All seems like a haze now that it's been a year. I think I was really upset that my dream and all I had worked for was ruined. A friend later said I may have been in love with the dream and not her. Maybe that's the reason I kept up all this insanity. My time on the farm had come to an end, and I was moving back to the town me and my ex lived in. I was set with my plan, excited to implement it and have what I considered just, but you know what they say of the best laid plans. My ex wanted to go to hang at her brother's as a welcome home party. I went but ended up drinking, heavily drinking, to the point of blackout. I don't remember much from that night but have had it recounted for me. I woke up in the drunk tank. Guess I couldn't lie and play it cool then, huh? The story I was told later is, while at her brother's I had gotten drunk and loud, kept waking up the new baby and we were asked to leave. So we caught a cab, and I confronted her in the cab, but all I could do was call her a lying, cheating whore on repeat. She got upset and ran into the house locking me out. I had a bunch of my stuff in her house, so I went to the door and demanded she let me in, all the while still only referring to her as the aforementioned 3 words. She told me to leave but my jacket and wallet were inside. It was below freezing at night still and probably wouldn't have made it home in the state I was in. I then kicked in her door to keep calling her LCW and grabbed my stuff. She was on the phone to the police, so I was taken away by them. One of the lowest points in my life. It still brings me so much shame to this day, but it is what happened and I am not going to sugarcoat it. I never laid a finger on her and I am so happy that I hadn't. Laying hands on women in that way is one of the scummiest things a man can do. I had to go back to her house once. They let me out because my stuff was still there. I apologized to her mom, who had been at her boyfriend's that evening promising to repair the door for her. Callie begged me to talk to her and like an idiot I didn't just leave. I told her I saw everything and she only admitted to Brad and Joe, lying about them and the others the whole time. Even when I brought up the screenshots, she still couldn't come clean. I left just shaking my head. There is still a ton to this story, but this is long enough. I could do a part 2 if there is interest, catching you folks up to where I am now and the messed up things that happened in between. Update. Sorry that part 2 has taken so long to put out, but life has been busy. First, the 2 things I get in the comments the most is advice, but seeing as this was over a year ago it's moot at this point. Second is if I told her brother about the possibility of his newborn not being his. I put a letter in his mailbox before I left the town. I recently found out that he got a paternity test and the kid is not his. Not sure if it was my letter or not. With all that out of the way, I guess I will go on with the story. My job started back up right after the last part of my story, so I threw myself into work. My career is very feast and famine, so in the spring I can work as much as I want. The next 2 weeks I worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, to keep all that went down from my mind. The only time I saw her talk to Callie was when I went to go repair her mom's door. I would only answer with as little as possible and try to not show her how hurt I was. Of course she begged me to get back with her, but I was done. That doesn't mean she wasn't blowing up my phone with calls and texts. I ignored them all. After those 2 weeks I decided to take Sundays off as I was invited to a wedding. The wedding was really good, even though I couldn't shake the thought of how I was planning on proposing to Callie. So even though it was a really good time, it was bittersweet. I did meet a woman there. She had just left the city because she got out of a bad relationship. We ended up helping each other immensely. For the rest of this story we will call her Angel. The next Saturday after the wedding I decided to go to my friend's house after work. We had a few and I told him everything right away. After regaling him with what was basically the original Reddit post, he looks me in the eye and says, "Well, this will be a lot easier to tell you." Then I reply, "Tell me what." He then proceeds to tell me about his Christmas party. For some background, I had let him take her to his Christmas party because he is a close friend and she was what I thought was a loyal girlfriend. The way he told it was that Callie got super drunk and went to some random dude's room that night. Awesome guess, that makes 6, but at this point does one more even matter? I asked him why he hadn't told me back in December when it happened. He said it was something he didn't want to do over the phone. I get that, but it would have maybe saved me a lot of trouble, but he didn't know what I was going through. You would think this would be the end of my story, but it is not. Callie's mom starts calling me to see if I knew where she was because she was disappearing for days at a time. Now I was still messed up and didn't actually want anything bad to happen to her. I started answering her calls again. It was a mistake. I think maybe just doing the straight block is probably the best course, but I have always been on good terms with my exes. It was kind of a point of pride for me. She was in a bad spot, not going to work, drinking with drugs, blowing through her savings. Just a total downward spiral. I still had love for her, even after all that went down, so I tried to help her get better. I would talk with her and bring her back to her mom's a few times. I thought it was cool with trying to help, but then the spa weekend I was going to propose to her came upon me. I had already spent $2,000 for the weekend with no refund, so I went alone. It was so depressing. Spas are not really my thing. I also couldn't get the thought out of my head that someone I loved would rather throw away their life than be with me. Think because I started letting her back in my life just to witness her become a worthless human instead of ignoring her. Those thoughts started to swirl in my brain box. Needless to say, when I got back for the weekend I was in a bad spot. I ended up having to take a week off work from how depressed and suicidal I was. During that time Angel and I talked a lot. She had me realize that letting her back in my life was a super bad decision. After that week, anytime she would call or text, I would just tell her to fuck off or not answer. Me and Angel became much closer too, hanging IRL sometimes as well. She lived 2 towns over, so we could not see each other as much as we wanted to. One thing led to another and we started seeing one another, just casually, as I still planned on moving and was not quite ready for someone in my life. It all went well for about 2 months, but the bitch weaseled her way back into my life. I had stopped receiving any calls or messages from Callie for a month, so I figured she moved on, or died out of the blue one day. However, I get a text from her reading that she's in AA now, that she needs to apologize for everything as it is one of the steps. For context, my dad went to AA and that is how he became part of my life again after many years of not knowing him. Unfortunately for me, she knew that. She asked to meet and I said yes. She said all the right words and gave what at the time seemed like a sincere apology. I told her that I was still really upset, but was happy she was getting the help she needed. Callie asked if she could call me for support, and like the true idiot of this grand tale, I said okay. I told Angel about it later in the evening. She was upset. She explained that she was just using me again, that she didn't want to deal with how I was back 2 months ago, and she was uncomfortable with the whole situation. I explained about my dad, how I cannot just let someone working to get better not succeed when I could have helped them. Angel said she understood, to do what I felt I needed to do, but to at least try to keep some distance. Spoiler for what's ahead. You know how she said she was in AA? Well, in the words of Tyler the Creator, that was a fucking lie. At first she would just send a few texts here and there. Then calls started to come in a few weeks later. I would try to support her emotionally, but it started to get weird cause she basically started to talk to me about her new boyfriend Eric. I found it weird because I would never mention Angel. Callie knew I had someone in my life and she would ask about her, but I told her it was none of her business. Everything was going fine more or less until Callie told me Eric was abusing her. I knew of the guy through friends of friends but did not really know him. One night she calls me saying she is terrified that he was going to assault her, begging me to pick her up to hide at my house. I get there and she is drunk out of her mind. I thought she must have fallen off the wagon. I say, I thought you stopped drinking. All she could reply with was, please hide me, he will hurt me again. So I took her to my house to help her out. She kept slamming drinks and started trying to sleep with me. I told her there was no way that was happening. We both have other people we are seeing and that there was no way I would get with her again. She cried but let it be. The next day I had to go to work, so I left her there. When I got back she had ordered more booze and was off her tits again. Angel called after work wanting to know if she could come spend the night. I told her she could, but that Callie was hiding from her boyfriend at my house. Angel got pissed. I totally understand why. She called me a fucking idiot and hung up on me. Callie, watching me on the phone, starts hitting on me as soon as the call was done. I got pissed and told her again that there was no way that would happen, so she went to call her new abusive boyfriend to pick her up. I made her hang up telling her I didn't want him in my house, so I drove her home so she could get back with him. What a shit show. Me and Angel make up later in the week. Callie stops calling for a while. My life seems to get better yet again for another couple weeks. Of course it did not last. One weekend while me and Angel are hanging out, Callie calls again, crying asking for me to come over because she was afraid her new guy was going to beat her again. I told her Angel was over and the last time I saw her it was not a good time. Angel on the other hand said we should, as she got out of an abusive relationship and couldn't have it on her conscience, that we could protect her. So we went over and her original AP Joe was already there. I was blown away that she would invite us over while he was there. She was drunk as a skunk. So I finally had to sit down with Joe. He starts out by apologizing to me about him hooking up with her while we were still a thing. He tells me that he knows how I felt because now she has been seeing him and sleeping with Eric. I say they had only been together for a few months and me and her had been together for years. I mentioned to him that I think it was very cowardly of him to not confess when I messaged him months ago if they were hooking up. He said Callie begged him to not let me know, and that he was so in love with her that he would just do anything she said. At that point I just pitied him, as Joe is where I was last winter. I tell him I should actually thank him because he helped me dodge a bullet. Later in the evening Callie tries to convince me and Angel to have a threesome with her. Of course we decline. That night was all types of strange. After that night I started not taking calls or messages again. Too much drama being in her whirlwind of insanity. I realized too that she never stopped drinking. She lied so she can have me back in her life. It was just low using the knowledge of my father against me. so I don't talk to her again till after I leave the town we lived in. The rest of that year I just hung with Angel. We were sad to let each other go, but we have remained friends to this day. That winter, I moved in with friends that lived not too far from the island off the coast of the province I live. My goal was to try and find employment on that island once work started back up in the spring. Living with my friends was so healing. All I did was walk my doggo in the bush. Full on zen. Before I moved to the island for work, I received a message from Callie. She informs me that she is on the same island I plan to move to, trying to get sober again. WTF. I go out there anyway because it is a very big island. Turns out where I ended up in my RV on the island is like a 3-hour drive from where she is. I lived in my RV and found a job that pays substantially more than my last one. I got back into some hobbies that I had been out of for some time and met a lot of awesome people. A month into living on the island, Callie gets a hold of me asking if I can give her a ride to the ferry to get back to her town. I was going to the mainland anyway for a concert, so I told her I could. I really just wanted her off my island, my new home. That's probably why I agreed. I pick her up and start taking her to the ferry. As soon as she gets in, she begs me to pick up liquor. Like, WTF, you came here to get sober, and you want to drink as soon as you are not isolated in your mom's friend's cabin? I refuse, telling her it is my car and I don't have to do anything. She complains the whole time. As she does, all I can think is, how were you ever in love with this pathetic creature? We arrived at the ferry. Turns out I have to wait an extra sailing for a drive on. Callie decides she cannot wait, so inquires if I would be upset if she just does a walk-on. I assure her that I would not mind one bit. In truth, I was relieved that I would not have to spend more time with her. I knew more than ever at that moment, I would never want anything to do with her ever again. My life is amazing now. I haven't been this happy in probably 9 years. So I am telling the story as a guide on what not to do. It also serves to let people know that you will recover from the hurt and there is a light at the end of the tunnel.